If you've spent any time online lately, you absolutely cannot miss it. The debate around gender identity, trans rights, and feminism, it's intense, it's everywhere, and honestly, it can be really confusing, with deeply personal beliefs clashing in ways that have very real consequences for people's lives. So what we're going to do here is try to get a handle on it. Let's just dive in and try to understand the core ideas, using our source material as a map.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to define gender-critical feminism. Then we'll look at how trans advocates see that ideology. After that, we'll hear a counter-argument from the gender-critical side. Then we'll zoom out a bit, look at the psychology that might be fueling this fire. And finally, we'll wrap up with the big, unresolved question at the heart of it all.
All right, first things first. We have to start with the basics to make sure we're all on the same page.
This term gets thrown around a lot, right? But what does it actually mean? What are its roots? Let's break it down.
Okay, so if you boil it all down, the absolute key idea here is a sharp distinction. This perspective says, on one hand, you have biological sex, male and female. They see this as a physical, unchangeable reality. On the other hand, you have gender. They see gender not as an internal feeling, but as a rigid social system, a hierarchy, really, that's been built to oppress women. So for them, sex is biology, but gender is politics. That's the foundational belief.
Okay, so we've got a baseline definition. Now, we're going to flip the script. How do trans advocates see this? To really get the other side of the story, you have to understand how they break down the arguments they're facing every day.
So our source here comes from a UK-based transgender community online, and what they did was try to reverse engineer the gender-critical viewpoint into 4 core pillars, basically to better understand what they're up against. Let's walk through what they came up with.
So the first belief they identified is this: there's no such thing as a male brain or a female brain. All the ways men and women act differently, that's all society, it's all nurture, not nature. Now, the implication here is huge, because it directly undermines the idea that someone could be born in the wrong body. If this belief is true, then being trans isn't about biology, it's about a reaction to social pressures.
Then there's the second belief they point to, that people assigned male at birth pose an inherent threat to people assigned female. This is the argument that's often used to defend sex-segregated spaces like bathrooms or shelters. But you might be thinking, wait a minute, the Reddit analysis itself points out a possible contradiction here. If there are no innate psychological differences, like belief number 1 says, how can one group be inherently more dangerous? It's a real point of tension.
The third belief? This one's going to sound pretty familiar to anyone who's looked into feminist theory. It's the concept of patriarchy. The idea that our society is structured in a way that people assigned female at birth are oppressed by people assigned male. The key difference here, though, is that the line is drawn strictly at biological sex.
And this brings us to the fourth belief, which really ties everything together. It argues that the only way to fight this oppression is to create sex-based rights, protections specifically for biological females. For that to work, biological sex has to be a fixed, unchangeable legal fact. And this right here explains the powerful opposition to things like gender self-ID laws. All right, time to flip the coin again. We've heard the critique from trans advocates. Now let's look at one of the central arguments coming from the gender-critical movement itself. And it centers on a really sensitive topic: homophobia. Wow, that is a heavy, heavy quote. It's from a clinician at the well-known Tavistock Clinic, and it just cuts right to the heart of a deep-seated fear within the gender-critical movement. That encouraging kids who don't conform to gender norms to transition is, maybe unintentionally, a new form of therapy aimed at correcting kids who would otherwise grow up to be gay or lesbian. So let's unpack the logic here, step by step. The argument goes like this. You start with the idea that many kids who are gender non-conforming, boys who are sensitive, girls who are tomboys, are the same kids who often grow up to be gay. Now, if those kids are getting bullied for being attracted to the same sex, transitioning can look like an escape hatch. A boy who likes boys can become a straight girl. A girl who likes girls can become a straight boy. The fear is that society is offering a way to fix the perceived problem, same-sex attraction, instead of fixing the actual problem, which is homophobia.
And this is where things get really personal and really heated. It becomes a battle over the meaning of words that are core to people's identities. You see the traditional definition of a lesbian on the left, a female attracted to other females, but the definition on the right includes trans women. Now, this creates enormous friction. The source material mentions the concept of the cotton ceiling, which describes the pressure some lesbians feel to date trans women, and how they can be labeled transphobic if they say no. From the gender-critical view, this feels like their very identity and sexual orientation are being redefined and even erased.
Okay, the arguments are flying, the emotions are high, and the two sides seem to be talking past each other. So why is this so explosive? Let's take a step back for a minute and try to look at this through a psychological lens. We're going to look at two concepts that might help us understand the dynamics at play here.
So, first up is a concept called internalized oppression. The idea is pretty straightforward. If you belong to a group that is constantly being told negative things about itself by the wider culture, well, over time, some members of that group might start to actually believe those negative messages. They absorb the stereotypes. And the second concept is psychological projection. You've probably seen this in action. It's when a person has some kind of internal conflict or insecurity, something they really don't like about themselves, and instead of facing it, they pin it on someone else. They turn their inner battle into an outer fight.
Now here's where it gets really interesting, because these two concepts can act like a psychological mirror. Each side can and does use these ideas to analyze the other. From the trans advocate perspective, they might say gender-critical feminists have internalized misogyny, reducing women to their biology, or that they're projecting their own gender insecurities. But then you flip the mirror, and the gender-critical side might argue that young trans people have internalized homophobia from society, or that trans activists are projecting their own internal conflicts onto their opponents. See how that works? It's not about saying who's right or wrong here. It's about seeing this pattern, this cycle of pathologizing each other that keeps the conflict spinning.
So after all that, peeling back all those layers of definitions, arguments, and psychology, where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us at the bedrock of the conflict, the fundamental clash that makes this whole debate so incredibly difficult.
And here it is in a nutshell. This whole thing really boils down to two deeply held beliefs that seem to be on a collision course. On one side, you have the right to define your own identity, to have your gender recognized as you see it. On the other, you have the right to maintain legal and social categories based on biological sex, primarily for safety and fairness. These aren't just abstract ideas. They have profound implications for people's daily lives. Look, this isn't just a simple policy disagreement. It's a conflict over fundamental truths about what it means to be a person, what reality is, what safety means. And when the very ground you're standing on is what's being debated, the stakes are unbelievably high for everyone involved. It really leaves you with a final, massive question. How on earth do you even begin to build a bridge across a divide that deep?